If you've been following Illinois transit news for the past year, you would have heard about the proposed merger between the CTA, Metra, and PACE systems into one agency that would coordinate, operate, and plan service in the entire Chicagoland region.
The Illinois House bill also tied any new transit funding for the Chicagoland region to this merger. This was a response to the continuous outcry against the CTA and its inability to operate the service it promised, while scavenging for money for the $5 billion Red Line extension project.
The current understanding for getting the CTA out of this hole is that some major reforms must happen in order for the CTA to get out of its pandemic-induced funding woes. But wait, why are they going so far as a merger of the three?
If you've ever tried using the broader Chicagoland system, chances are that you've run into multiple figurative walls that make it needlessly complicated to have multi-agency trips. Take the most basic example, transferring between Metra and the CTA.
While CTA trains display Metra connections on their route maps, sadly the only true connection between the two is at Jefferson Park on the Blue Line, the most logical place to have a good transfer.
Meanwhile, in the Loop, for example, you're forced onto city streets or the pedway to get between the L and Metra.
This is a frustrating part of getting around Chicago. Other American cities like Boston, New York, Philadelphia, and Washington, D.C. all manage to have direct connections between their train stations and transit systems, let alone other suburban connections. So why is Chicagoland different? Well, this requires some history!
Chicago was more or less built on trains. Well, maybe first a canal, but then definitely trains. First, steam railroads linking the east and west coasts met in Chicago, making it a central meeting place for railroads across the country. Grand terminals were erected in what is now the Loop, and some railroad companies, such as the Chicago and Northwestern,
Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy,
and the Illinois Central, decided to develop suburbs along their rail lines.
Choo-choo! On the back end of the 19th century, the first elevated, or if you're short on time, L, was built between the Loop and the 1893 World's Fair. But wait, that goes to the same place as the Illinois Central.
Fight!
And thus a bitter rivalry had been started between the ever-expanding L system fighting against commuter railroads.
These battles would continue on such lines as the Lake Street L to Oak Park, the Northwest L to both Ravenswood and Evanston, the Douglas Park branch through Lawndale, the O'Hare extension, and the most vicious of them all, the Dan Ryan branch to 95th, where the most important battle of them all took place.
When the Illinois Central was forced to electrify by city ordinance, they were midway through completely changing the face of their commuter rail line running along the southern lakefront. There was a paradigm shift from commuter rail to rapid transit, so much so that an old L map from 1947 has the Illinois Central on it.
Service to South Chicago used to be every 10 minutes all day on weekdays, with service every 40 minutes south on the main line.
All was not well, though. The usual 1-2 punch of urban highways, as well as an increasingly poor urban core, began the long decline of the Illinois Central's more city-focused operations. In came the Dan Ryan line, a brand new line with extremely fast trains that can get you from the deep south side all the way into the Loop in less than 25 minutes, all while providing an integrated bus and train system.
It was never more over for the Illinois Central. Ridership plummeted, dropping 3/4 between 75th and 111th stations, with many riders opting for the fare-integrated CTA, which had better off-peak service to boot.
The war continued on, with the CTA also reworking south side buses to feed directly into the 95th terminal, making it more cumbersome to take the Illinois Central.
You might think, okay, the damage is done, right? But wait, there's more. The 1980s saw new Lakeshore Drive buses that served the south side that went through the last remaining Metro Electric markets, the 6 and 2 through Hyde Park and South Shore.
After being taken over by the RTA and surviving several state-induced funding cuts, the new Metro Electric service had become a withered version of its former self, with service continuing to be cut to this very day. Once the crown jewel of Chicago's commuter network, it is now the one Metro line that continues to shed riders as people abandon the line.
And why would anyone but mainline suburbanites ride the line today? There's
bus service that's more frequent, faster, and integrated into the rest of the CTA system. Taking Metro from the south side is cumbersome and has little value to be gained other than taking slightly nicer trains.
This is the sad state of interagency competition in Chicago. Rather than working together to create one integrated agency, resources are being wasted to ensure that one single system becomes the preferred choice for riders.
Upon leaving the city limits of Chicago, the integration between Chicago's two main suburban agencies, Metra and Pace, leaves a lot to be desired. The biggie is the lack of schedule coordination between the two. For example, Metra and Pace routes tend to run rather infrequently. This makes connections all the more important as wait times will force you to do the good old-fashioned pace sprint. Shit!
Elsewhere in the world, it's common to see timed connections between regional rail systems and local bus networks, allowing seamless travel between the two modes. However, Metra trains often arrive most conveniently when the Pace terminal is completely devoid of buses.
When Metra and Pace fail to have connections, Pace can run a parallel route. Take, for example, the Pace 213 on the North Shore. The 213 completely parallels the UP North Line, the tracks which laid the foundation for the suburbs along it. But instead, more often than not, the bus is more convenient. It runs more often than Metra and costs less than Metra. With proper regional coordination, Metra will be running more often, with the 213 acting more as a supplemental route.
It might seem that the situation is dire, as the walls between Chicago's three main agencies seem as strong as ever. But fear not, kind viewers, for there has been some change. One such effort has been RTA Wayfinding, a project which involves adding new signage at major CTA, Pace, and Metra transfer points.
To show why this is important, let's start with a hypothetical. It's a late night after a Cubs game at Wrigley Field, and you need to get back to your hometown of Berwyn on the BNSF line. You go into the station, and all the map shows is the CTA, with the connections to Metra only being a small symbol next to the stations.
Not very useful. So instead, the RTA now has its own maps with CTA, Metra, and Pace, with the most scuffed CTA Metra map we've ever seen to date.
Though still not as scuffed as the Red Line extension.
What the?
Another part of these measures is labeling bus stops for Pace and the CTA at both Metra and CTA stations. One step further could be to publish this wayfinding info online, like WMATA, who has local station area maps for viewing on their website.
Though, unfortunately, the CTA still has yet to fully commit to the new design, as the RTA wayfinding has only appeared at Metra stations so far. This reflects the broader CTA attitude against its fellow agencies, like when the CTA suggested integrating Divi into Ventra before Metra.
Despite these gains within the current system, larger systemic issues permeate the air.
It seems with all the issues of interagency fighting and uncooperation, we need someone from outside Chicago to fix our system.
A great lake deserves to be named after a great state. Lake Michigan shall be known as Lake Illinois.
But take it from an actual billionaire. Trump is rich in only one thing: stupidity.
Illinois will now be annexing Green Bay.
Whenever I'm about to do something, I think, would an idiot do that? And if they would, I do not do that thing.
God bless America. And bear down.
We need someone from outside Chicago to fix our system.
Mr. J.B. Pritzker, tear down these walls. Why, hello there. Now, we've had to rewrite this outro multiple times because there's been a lot happening in the past few months. And we decided we'd sort of do like a little bit of like a recap, cut and splice between each of the different sort of stages of this end of script. So I'll start with the beginning. The beginning of it all. To consolidate or not to consolidate? That is the central question. We originally had the Metropolitan Mobility Act. This would have completely consolidated all of the agencies in the Chicagoland region into one mega agency. This agency would have then foreseen fares, service, funding, all of it. This would have been a central authority, with it also overseeing representation from both Chicago and its suburbs. The MMA had a lot of good stuff going for it, but with it, it raised some questions about how practical this would be. How politically practical would this be, merging both the CTA and suburban agencies like Metro and Pace into one roof? How would this have worked in terms of representation? Would there have been a bias towards suburbs versus urban representation? And finally, how much would this really save, considering it would have consolidated everything into one roof, but we would have lost the agencies? Is that even politically feasible? There was a lot of questions with the MMA. And this is where we would have proposed this idea called the Verkehrsverbund model, based off of Germany, where there'd be a central authority like the RTA, and it would oversee all of the planning, fares, and service of the entire region. But the boards would still remain there. They'd just focus on operating service rather than planning their own stuff.
Boom. That's all in the past now. Say hi to NITA. NITA is a brand new agency, and it'll basically accomplish all that. It'll still allow for the CTA Pace and Metra to continue to operate service, but NITA will consider how fares between these agencies can be improved, how their service can be better coordinated together, and how to generally improve the operations of transit around the region. In particular, NITA proposes something that's pretty unusual for the U.S., which would be to develop around transit stations to create a new source of revenue that would be more stable for the entire region. This will be a game changer for Chicago. We're excited to see you soon at NITA.
They killed her! Nita's dead! It's been a rough couple of weeks. The Illinois state legislature tried to make the Hail Mary of all Hail Marys. At the 11th hour, they threw the ball, but the wide receiver did not catch it. It was fumbled badly. They were trying to ram through the NITA bill, but they didn't put any funding in there. And when the funding came to the table, people were objecting to it. And it wasn't even that big of a ask. It was like a slight increase on taxes for food delivery was one of the main funding systems. Sorry you had to pay a little more for your Uber Eats. But what happened, and what shows what happened, is that there was a gross communication on the Illinois legislature. We need to pressure Illinois state legislators into both doing new revenues for this grand, reorganization and reforms. We need the revenues to keep the system running and to keep it growing into the years in the future. And we need the reforms to break down these barriers that we've been talking about this entire video. We need revenues and reform, and only then can Chicagoland's transit agencies stand on the world class, maybe alongside systems like New York, Paris, Berlin, Moscow if you're into that, Tokyo, I don't know. But this is what we need in order to improve transit and secure the future of Illinois' transit system.